We should know by now that when we're going to hit the golf ball with the driver, we don't actually want the driver to hit the turf. Different to a lot of golf shots where taking a divot is something we want. With a driver, taking a divot is definitely something we don't want to do. We should be able to take that ball cleanly. Maybe we'll knock the tee peg over, but there should be no grass or mud taken either side. And the bottom of our driver head should remain fresh and clean throughout its life. Now, if you've been digging down and taking too much of a divot, this next tip might be a consideration, because we're talking about hovering the golf club at setup. So that means as we address the golf ball, we get ourselves into a nice addressed position, and then we think that club's touching the floor. We've just said that as we bring that club back down, we don't want it to touch the floor. So if it's touching the floor now, and then I don't want it to be there, I'm going to have to lift it up slightly. Now, for some golfers, that concept of lifting the club up is difficult to imagine. They either don't lift it up at all and take a divot, they lift it up too much and hit the top of the ball. So what we'd like to consider is that we lift it up just a couple of millimeters in the swing, or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, lift it up by a couple of millimeters pre-swing. So as I set up, I might have it grounded, get myself comfortable, have a little waggle, and then just lift the golf club off the floor, and you can see there's a little gap underneath there. I'm setting the club up behind the ball, it's staying nice and still, and that's when I can start my swing. Now, for some golfers as well, that actually helps them reduce tension because they've just got the club nicely hovered and it's not sort of pushed in and pressed down onto the floor, but they're just giving it a waggle, a little loose, and then they set up. It isn't personally something I use myself, but I do teach it to some golfers who do struggle with grounding the club out. I give them that concept of lift it up by a couple of mil, and then when you swing through, keep it a couple of millimeters off the floor, and you should get that nice quality of strike. So probably something you're only going to focus on with driver, because with the wedges, with the hybrid clubs, with the irons, actually getting the club to hit the turf is something we want it to do, so there's no problem with returning back to the same height. But if you're struggling with your driver, you're taking the divot too heavy, you could consider lifting it, giving it a little waggle, keeping it off the floor, and then trying to bring it back down to that part where it's just above the ground as you hit through, and hopefully there you can see that I've knocked the tee peg over, but I didn't take a divot, I didn't get underneath the ball too much because I was hovering my driver.